The Council of Rexar had made their judgment clear. Death by Shadowfang cubs. It was the cruelest sentence in their arsenal, reserved for the most despicable criminals. The cubs were apex predators in their infancy, born with razor-sharp claws and an insatiable hunger that drove them to tear apart anything that moved. No creature had ever survived an encounter with a hungry litter. Illyra Morn stood in the center of the execution arena, her hands bound behind her back, watching as the massive steel doors groaned open. The crowd of alien spectators above her fell silent, leaning forward in their seats to witness the inevitable carnage. She had been accused of espionage, of infiltrating Vrexar space with hostile intent. The truth that her ship had simply malfunctioned and drifted into their territory meant nothing to them. Humans were still unknown to most of the galaxy, considered weak and primitive by those who had encountered them. The first cub emerged from the darkness, its obsidian scales gleaming under the arena lights. Drac was larger than his siblings, his golden eyes fixed on Illyra with predatory focus. 4 more cubs followed, each one a coiled spring of muscle and teeth. The crowd murmured in anticipation. This would be over quickly. Illyra took a slow breath and did something no one expected. She sat down. The cubs circled her, hissing and snapping, but she remained perfectly still. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her breathing steady, her posture non-threatening. Years of training as an exobiologist had taught her to read animal behavior across dozens of species. These cubs were aggressive, yes, but they were also curious. They were testing her, trying to determine if she was prey or threat. Drac approached first, lowering his massive head until his snout was inches from her face. Hot breath washed over her skin. The crowd held its collective breath. One bite and her head would be gone. Illyra closed her eyes and began to hum. It was an old lullaby her grandmother had taught her, a soft melody that seemed absurd in this arena of death. But sound was universal. Vibration transcended species. The cub's hissing quieted. Drac's head tilted, confusion replacing hunger in his golden gaze. She opened her eyes and met his stare directly, showing neither fear nor aggression. Slowly, deliberately, she began to speak in a low, gentle voice. She didn't know if he could understand her words, but tone mattered more than language. Easy, big guy. I know you're hungry. I know this is scary for you too. The other cubs had stopped circling. They watched their leader, waiting for his signal. Drac's nostrils flared as he scented her. Processing the strange creature before him, Illyra noticed something the crowd hadn't. The cubs were thin, their scales dull. They weren't just aggressive. They were starving and neglected. The realization ignited something fierce in her chest. These weren't monsters. They were children, weaponized and abandoned. They've been starving you, she whispered, anger bleeding into her voice. Using you as executioners because you're desperate. Drac made a sound halfway between a growl and a whimper. Illyra's bound hands prevented her from reaching out, so she did the next best thing. She lowered her head in a gesture of submission, exposing her neck, the most vulnerable position she could offer. The arena erupted in confused shouts. What was the human doing? This was suicide. But Drac didn't attack. Instead, he moved closer, his massive form settling beside her. His body radiated heat. And despite everything, Illyra felt an odd sense of calm. The other cubs approached cautiously, forming a protective circle around her rather than preparing to feast. Hours passed. The council demanded the guards intervene to force the execution, but protocol forbade interference once the sentence had begun. The cubs had to deliver death, or the prisoner would be released. It was ancient law, and even the council couldn't break it. As night fell over the arena, Illyra finally managed to work her hands free from the poorly tied bonds. The first thing she did was reach out and place her palm on Drac's scarred snout. He rumbled, a sound that vibrated through her bones, but didn't pull away. You're not killers, she told him softly. You're survivors. Just like me. When dawn broke, the arena guards found something unprecedented. Illyra Morn sat cross-legged in the center of the ring. 5 Shadowfang cubs arranged around her in a defensive formation, Drax's massive head rested in her lap, his eyes locked on anyone who approached with unmistakable warning. The council had no choice but to release her. Ancient law was absolute, but Illyra didn't leave alone. When she walked out of that arena, the cubs followed. Drax remained at her side, his loyalty absolute. The other four flanked her, hissing at the shocked Vrexar guards who scrambled to clear a path. The council protested. Those cubs were property of the state, weapons of execution. But Illyra's response was broadcast across every Vrexar communication channel. You starved children and called it justice. You created monsters because you were too cowardly to execute prisoners yourselves. These cubs aren't weapons. They're not yours. And if you try to take them, you'll learn exactly why humans survived long enough to reach the stars. The footage of her walking through the Vrexar capital, flanked by 5 massive predators who moved as her guardians rather than captors, spread across the galaxy within days. Other species watched in amazement as this small human commanded the loyalty of creatures that had killed dozens of their own kind. Illyra Morn became something unexpected, not a criminal, but a symbol, proof that humans possessed something that couldn't be measured in military strength or technological advancement. Empathy weaponized not through manipulation, but through genuine connection. And Drax, the cub who was supposed to be her executioner, became her most devoted protector. Where she went, he followed. When other species threatened her, they found themselves facing not just a human's determination, but the absolute ferocity of creatures who had chosen their pack. The galaxy had thought humans were weak, easily broken, insignificant. They had been catastrophically wrong, because humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons or their warships. It was their uncanny ability to turn enemies into family, to find connection in the most hostile places, and to inspire loyalty that transcended species and survival itself. The cubs would have killed her. Instead, they would die for her. And across the stars, watching species began to understand that perhaps humans weren't the primitives they'd assumed. Perhaps they were something far more dangerous and far more valuable. They were the species that could turn death sentences into unbreakable bonds. They were humanity, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again.